Death. Death is a very sad, very scary, very uncertain aspect of life that we're all going to have to face at some point. And death plays just as big a role in movies as it does in real life. And presumably, because different people have different perspectives on death and different experiences, several movies have gone about tackling death in a variety of ways. Most movies choose to play it straight, and a lot of the time, it can be just as heartbreaking watching a fictional character die as it can be watching someone real die. This is because the movie or show has taken the time to flesh out the characters and their relationship with each other and get the audience to be invested in their journey. That when that journey gets abruptly cut short, it hurts. Oftentimes, a character's death is a major plot point, being the catalyst that sends the hero on their journey. This can admittedly feel pretty cheap, but if it's done right, it can get you more invested in the hero. The mark of a bad movie is if a major character dies and I feel nothing. On the other hand, action and horror movies make killing the bad guy the goal of the movie, so the death of the main villain is meant to be this triumphant moment. A lot of action movies in particular feature very fast-paced run-and-gun fight scenes where several faceless goons get shot, and these scenes exist to hype up the audience and show how badass the lead character is. There are even some cases where death is portrayed as being fucking hilarious. There was a movie that came out at the top of this year based on a Stephen King novel called The Monkey, where the over-the-top death of a character is essentially the punchline. A lot of people didn't like this movie, but I thought it was really good. Not only because the deaths were so elaborate and over the top, but because it fit into the movie's perspective and message about death, which is that sometimes it can be pretty funny, and that there's no use getting hung up on it when there's so much life left to live and it could be gone at any minute. As someone trying to find ways to deal with death anxiety, I feel like I kinda needed to hear that. But of course, the kings of showing the funny side of death are the Final Destination series. Founded by Glenn Morgan and James Wong, this series spans 6 movies over the course of 25 years and follows a very standard formula. Each movie starts with a group of characters escaping death after one of them envisions a horrible disaster happening to them. After a period of grief, death catches up to the group of survivors and picks them off one by one in increasingly brutal and over-the-top ways, all while the survivors have to figure out the rules and try to stay one step ahead of death's game. It's a very unique take on a typical slasher movie, where the killer isn't some psycho in a mask, but the actual literal embodiment of death, which is much harder to outrun and much harder to outsmart. There are a lot of underlying themes of facing mortality, the lengths people go to survive, and bonds formed by tragedy. But the main selling point of the series are the death scenes. The series struck a chord with audiences for providing several brutally violent and over-the-top kills for its characters, with each one feeling like a Rube Goldberg machine from hell. Each one is set up really well and plays up the tension and intensity of the scene. The cinematography and sound design is enough to make your skin crawl watching these, all leading up to a bloody lovely money shot. But with kills as gruesome as these, why do so many people see them as humorous? Are we all just a bunch of deranged lunatics? Well, yes, but I think there's a little bit more to it than that. Firstly, the movies walk a very fine line between realism and camp. They do a good job building up each kill and making it suspenseful, but the situations are always so crazy and the deaths are so elaborate that you can't help but laugh at them. It's like you're watching a live-action Looney Tunes cartoon. The violence is very graphic, but it always feels like cartoon violence. The shock value adds to the humor. Also, there are certain characters in these movies that are portrayed in a way to where you are kind of waiting for them to die. Particularly in the last 3. There are some grade A assholes that you just want to see get dispatched in the most over-the-top, painful way possible. Maybe this makes us all terrible people, but the fact that I saw Final Destination Bloodlines in theaters and there were actual cheers when that little kid got crushed by the piano is hilarious to me. That's the other thing. Some of the later entries become a bit more self-aware, whereas the best in the series still makes the threat of death something to be concerned about and gets you to feel for the characters. It's all a careful balancing act, and I think the Final Destination movies accomplish it very well. Ranking them and talking about why one is better than the other is kind of tricky since they're all essentially the same movie, but I might as well give my thoughts on them individually. The first film is obviously a classic. It does a good job setting up the rules and the threat. It has really good cinematography, an intense score, and characters that, while not as fleshed out as others, you do end up caring about enough to want to see them survive. 5. I'd give it a 3.5 out of 5. The second film was just alright. A lot of these movies are judged based on their opening scene, and this one is quite good and really captures the anxiety of driving on the highway. But the rest of the movie was kinda standard and the characters were pretty boring. I'd give it a 3 out of 5. The third film, I actually really liked. I thought the opening at the amusement park was great, the editing was really well done, the clues hinting at the different kills with the pictures was kinda interesting. And I like how the characters change throughout the story. I thought it was well handled. Not as good as the first, but I'd still give it a 3.5 out of 5. The fourth is undeniably the worst, and is thankfully the shortest. It's the one that sells itself on the novelty of being in 3D, and even the 3D isn't that great, outside of the opening credits. There are some alright deaths, but the characters are all piles of shit, the story is uninteresting, the writing is terrible. It was just bad. 2 out of 5. The fifth is slightly better. I honestly don't know which I'd prefer between the fifth and the second. I'm inclined to say the fifth because it does a bit more with the characters, introduces some new mechanics, and plays around with the trauma and effects this would have on certain characters, witnessing their loved one's death and waiting around for their own. The effects are not great, but not horrendous. It doesn't flaunt the 3D like the fourth one did. There are some really solid deaths and good performances. It's not perfect, but I'd give it a 3 out of 5. Lastly, Final Destination Bloodlines, the 6th movie in the series and the first one I saw, in 4DX even. I had a fun time with it when I first saw it, but now that I've gone through the entire franchise, not only do I appreciate it a lot more, but I'd have to agree that it's the best one in the series. Its family connection makes the story feel more personal, it balances out the drama and suspense with a darkly twisted sense of humor. It has some of the best performances out of the series, some of the most creatively brutal kills, it ties up a lot of things from the earlier films, and it had one of the most poignant, touching send-offs for a horror legend of all time. And speaking of that send-off, not only are Tony Todd's final words extremely powerful in terms of the series they're a part of, but they also hold a lot of importance for people in their day-to-day lives.
I intend to enjoy the time I have left, and I suggest you do the same. Life is precious. Enjoy every single second.
Even though for most people the threat of death isn't as immediate as it is in these movies, it doesn't make it any less scary. And much like the characters in Final Destination, the fear of death often distracts us from truly appreciating life. I just turned 25, and I know it's still very early for me to be worrying about this stuff, but it's always there in the back of my head. None of this is permanent. But I think that's why movies like Final Destination are so important to so many people. Not only do they offer an over-the-top and comedic angle to an otherwise dark and intense subject, but they remind us to live every day like it's your last.
You never know when. Good luck.